order. The chair of the Public Safety Committee is caught in traffic, so he will be arriving a little bit on the late side, so I thought it was time to get started. I am here representing the Personnel and Animal Welfare Committee, so it's just the chair, and we have council members Bonin, Buscaino, and Fuentes here as Public Safety Committee. So we'll begin by taking public comment. The first speaker is George Wolfberg from the Pacific Palisades Community Council.
Good morning, committee members.
Good morning.
Nice to be here. Glad to see that this meeting has occurred and we've gotten this far along. The Community Council, I am the elected at-large representative and representing them today. And we have been strongly in favor of this program for many, many years, advocated, gone to lots of meetings, and obviously support the program. I have questions. I don't know if we're allowed to ask questions, but there is, under paragraph 1, there would be a procedure for expanding the list, and it wasn't clear what that procedure would be. Or is it going to require a new ordinance to add something to the list, or will there be a committee that will take input from the community or the users of the program? So I'd like to know how that's going to happen. And I'd like to also say that the rollout on LAPD seems a little slow, that maybe they could do a little more, more divisions, more areas, quicker. So that's the short story.
Thank you.
You forgot something, George. You forgot something. You had a specific ask.
Oh, I do have it. There's one section that's missing from the list. 112.04 parent small c. Request that be added to the list of what can be enforced under this ordinance. Thank you.
What section number was that again?
It's the gas-powered leaf blower.
What is it?
The gas-powered leaf blower.
04 parent c.
Thank you. And the next speaker is David Zaft.
Good morning,
Good
council
morning.
members. My name is David Zaft. I'm president of the Board of Animal Services Commissioners. Obviously, I speak here today as an individual and not on behalf of the board. I just wanted to say I'm thrilled that this is here now. I strongly support the proposal. As a commissioner, I've seen firsthand the challenges that our animal control officers face in enforcing the great progressive animal care and animal protection laws that the City Council has passed. And I think this proposal will provide them with a much-needed tool that they can add to their tool belt to effectively enforce those laws. Right now, if they want to pursue a violation, they have to bring a criminal case, and that's very resource-intensive for our animal control officers. We have 53 officers to cover the whole city. This will give them a lot of flexibility in pursuing violations that don't warrant the resources that are needed to pursue a criminal case. And I just want to applaud the City Attorney's Office and Council Member Koretz, you and your staff, for getting us here. I also think it's wonderful that the recommendation is to use a vendor. I think that's very smart, somebody who's done that as far as dealing with a lot of the administration. And also wanted to recognize the City Attorney's Office in allowing for department-specific implementation, because the different departments have different needs and will be implementing this slightly differently, and so I think that's very smart. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David. The next speaker, and I can only guess who this really is Big Ears.
Good morning, residents of Los Angeles, and you, Mr. Michael Fuhr. Regarding the partnership of this investment, we're talking about ACE, Administrative Citation Enforcement, involving what? LAPD, $25,000, DAS, $5,000, and this is just punitive inscriptions or writings for this alternative method of enforcement. The real situation is this. If we don't apply strictly by the rules of what animal services is for, as opposed to just giving dogs away, then how are we to collect the needed monies that the city is lacking and dragging behind on? The old method of threat of jail time, criminal record, that was preposterous. A imbecile can see that. The complexity of criminal citations on arrest for violations is, I can see if an animal that you brought into this country, into this city, and into our residential homes is a threat, take care of it. But LAPD shouldn't even be involved with animal service. This should be the result of what animal service duties and responsibilities and policies should fall under, in protection of the safety and the health and the welfare of the public. So, yes, I sound like I'm against this, but it's finally a good idea, a comprehensive idea now that you took this measurement in the right direction. For we need 53.28 to happen, which is what? Unlicensing. Number 2, 5308, animal LA rivers, to care for them. And let's go back to the woof, barking dog, 5363. Those are issues that animal services are supposed to do. So if you're not going to get out there and do the job for public interest, then what good is it for us to bring up this costly effect of $2,547,000 for this annual budget of LAPD and DAS? Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you. Skip Haynes.
Good morning, gentlemen. I'm Skip Haynes. I'm with CLAW, Citizens for Los Angeles Wildlife, and our particular interest in seeing ACE implemented as quickly as possible is two. My partner, Ali Smard, will speak to the wildlife. I'm speaking to specifically, I live in the hills, and we have, where I live is the #1 spot for catastrophic fire event in the city of Los Angeles, in Laurel Canyon, off Laurel Canyon Boulevard, which is the busiest two-lane street in the country. We'd like to see ACE implemented. We've asked Councilmember Koretz to put forth a motion to have a $1,000 fine for people caught smoking in no smoking zones. At this point, there is no fine for that. Even though there is an ordinance, there is no fine. We'd like to see a $1,000 fine. We'd like to see it along, if someone can't afford $1,000, we'd like to see 50 hours of community service, put them on the side of the road picking up cigarette butts. And we think that using ACE as the enforcement measure is the first time that we've been able to have an enforcement measure on something in the ecologically sensitive areas. So we are asking you to pass this as soon as possible. It's something that it also brings a huge revenue stream in. A parking ticket is $63. It takes 128 parking tickets to make $1,000. It takes one citation for smoking. It's a large revenue stream. It will help make our city safe from our #1 threat, which is fire. So we, CLAW and our followers, supporters, strongly urge you to pass this as quickly as possible with no amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Allison Samard. Hopefully I pronounced your last name right. I've certainly known you long enough to do that.
Right. Good morning. We are Allison Samard, Chair of Citizens for Los Angeles Wildlife. Just speaking to the point of animals and wildlife services, should not be separate from LAPD. These are important issues that need to be enforced. Our city, as these things are enforced, it raises the awareness that we have laws that need to be enforced, like wild animal permits, impounding wild birds, animals in the LA River. Illegal trapping. These are things that are important to the heart of what Los Angeles is, having a mountain range running through the center of our city. Our environment is important to our city, and there's plenty of people who live here who are totally unaware that we have an important ecosystem. And so passing this is a really important way to streamline that, and CLAW supports it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And members, I'd just like to say I think this is a landmark occasion for the City of Los Angeles because we're taking the final step in moving forward the ACE program, or Administrative Citation Enforcement. I think this will be a game changer in protecting our local neighborhoods. It's been very difficult up till now to find a way to prevent low-level quality of life violations. Excuse me, I'm kind of losing my voice. Bad timing. No. Up till now, as an example, you have endemic loud parties at a particular location. You can call up the police. Usually they'll shut it down. If you're lucky, it'll stay shut down. More often, an hour later, it'll be up again. And the police will come out a few times. Usually, there's nothing really that they can do with teeth. If they wind up being more aggressive and they actually take the person to court, by the time it gets to court, the person may have moved because it takes so long, but most likely it gets before a judge. The judge says, why the hell are you wasting our time in a clogged court system with a loud party? And they'll often throw it out. So we really have no good way to address these quality of life issues in the neighborhoods. This has been a proven successful system. Most closely in terms of other big cities, Sacramento and San Diego have done well with it. It's been frustrating for our law enforcement folks not to have this kind of a tool. And so now we will have the ability to assess citations at $250, increasing to $500, increasing to $1,000. Of course, the city attorney's office can always decide to take a more aggressive step if it's warranted. But otherwise, in all likelihood, you have a loud party, you get one $250 citation, that's probably going to be enough. If not 500, if not to 1,000. In most cases, this will discourage whatever the violation is. So that's why when I was first elected, I started taking on this issue, although it's been talked about for many, many years in the city of Los Angeles, but it's never been successfully moved forward. So now, after almost 5 years of working on this, we have a draft ordinance. We originally wanted to have this apply to most or all of the city departments. Some of the issues are more controversial that we have in our codes. So there were a lot of pushback, so we decided to do this as a pilot with the departments with whom the enforcement will not be a highly controversial issue. I don't think you're going to see a bunch of people here saying, let noisy party houses continue. There's no constituency. The constituency is to actually protect the neighborhood and enforce them. And the ones that seem the clearest were animal services and LAPD on low-level violations. So I think this will be very successful. Hopefully at some point it will expand to other departments, but that will involve further hearings. So those who were concerned about other departments, there'll be a lot of input before that happens, and only, of course, if these initial departments are as successful as we think. So I'm very proud to have us moving forward. after all the years in the making and all the work by all kinds of different folks from LAPD and Animal Services and City Attorney and many, many others. So I thank everyone here who's been involved and look forward to moving it forward. And now I hand it off to the Public Safety Chair, Chinglander.
Thank you very much, and I too want to thank everybody that's been involved in this. I'd like to hear from the departments as well, and if we can, have them walk us through the various aspects of this. And so if we can ask the departments to come on up. And in terms of, you said nobody complaining about not having noisy parties. I'm not sure. I think Officer Graham has some pretty noisy parties in his house. Might have to hear back from. Not sure. In fact, I've seen several videos recently on social media of him dumping ice cold water on himself. So we'll have to.
That wasn't the CD12 staff barbecue?
Oh, that's what that. I'm sorry. Yes, that's might have been that. Morning. Whoever's ready, feel free to jump on in. I think there's more of you than there are of us. And you're armed, so whatever you would like to say or do.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Rita Venegas, and I'm from the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office. And thank you for coming in early this morning to consider a report to council. As most of you are aware, the ACE is merely an administrative citation. It's a process that will result in either payment of a fine or an appeal to an administrative hearing. Currently, the present citation process, as Councilmember Koretz indicated, could result in a criminal conviction, penalties, probation, and possibly a jail sentence. Given the fact that LAPD in 2012 handled approximately 33,000 LAMC code violations, which our office handled, would make these more suitable for administrative violations. At this point, what would happen was the departments would issue a citation. The current ordinance allows for 15 days to request an administrative review. We're asking for a 20-day window in which the violator may request a free initial review through the Office of the City Attorney to determine the validity of the citation, at which time we would look at the citation, make a determination whether or not that citation is valid. If so, if allowed to use a vendor, the vendor would then send the responsible person a citation and allowing them another 15 days to pay. If they're still not satisfied with that outcome, they may request a administrative hearing, and they would have to pay the fine amount, if not ask for a hardship waiver from our office. Those hearings we are hoping will be held within a couple of weeks, and a decision rather timely back to them. And we would use that processor to help us with the collection aspect as well.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Let me open it up to my colleagues for questions. First, Joe.
Thank you, Mitch. Question for LAPD. You know, I'm thinking about this program, and I put on my senior lead officer hat. These are citations that, you know, you keep this in your pocket, and these are all violations that impact quality of life around the city of Los Angeles. I mean, drinking in public, urinating, defecating in public, illegal vending, tampering with trash. I mean, I just recall getting numerous calls from residents on these quality of life citations. What we're doing here is decriminalizing these violations. That's exactly what we're doing. To LAPD, what happens if after so many citations you addressing, or how are we addressing how do we foresee addressing repeat offenders? Because obviously warrants aren't going to be issued if they continue to get cited. Is that my understanding? Can you address that?
We will not, we will not. We are going to be capturing those. We will be able to identify if we have repeat offenders or not through our CAD system. And so obviously either way it's going to be an infraction, and we'll continue to send them to the city attorney as they look at what's the best way to handle that. Whether they want to increase fines or if they're going to change the policy.
Okay, so Ms. Smith calls Senior Lead Officer Nua at Harbor. We have an individual continues to get cited for drinking in public. This is on his fifth offense, and obviously this individual is not getting the signal, not getting the message. We just continue to cite and cite and cite.
We
and
also
cite.
have the ability to do the criminal side of things as well. I mean, that's still always an option.
That's still an option.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So this becomes, in essence, a wobbler.
That's correct.
Can you explain to me, City Attorney, the hardship waiver?
We're in the process of creating a form, and it would be what the amount that's determined by the City of Los Angeles for current other administrative hearing type programs. They would have to come in with documentation. It could be a pay stub or something from General Relief indicating that they have the inability to pay for an administrative hearing. Upon review of those, it would allow them to have a hearing at no cost.
Okay.
Most municipalities with administrative citation programs, allow for a hardship waiver for those who are not able to put forth the fine amount, if you will, to have their hearing.
And the revenue that's going to be generated, where is that going to go to? General fund?
Yes, sir.
General fund.
That's required by code.
It's required. Okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
I have
Great.
a question.
Thank you. Yes, please, Ms. Martinez.
I had a question about the hearing officers. Do you have a process in place to select or appoint the hearing officers? I didn't see that in the report. That's where I was at.
Yes, we've been working with the LA Superior Court to utilize
They're volunteers, right?
their judge pro tems. We could also use administrative law judges. However, there would be a cost associated with that. And also any individual that has completed the requirements for dispute resolution.
And how soon after that will you implement the program after you select the hearing officers? How long is that going to take?
We're hoping to do it all simultaneously, to do our training. We've already developed our policies and procedures and been working closely with Superior Court to get persons. We've got over 30 persons who are interested in working in this type of program immediately.
The goal is that by October 1st, we would have all the various elements of the program in place, including the pool of hearing officers that would contribute to the program.
Are you including or adding any additional city departments?
There is a request for 6 staff in this proposal. It's detailed in the report specifically. The staff is dedicated to the Office of Finance, the Department of Animal Services, and the City Attorney's Office in order to effectively implement the program and work with the vendor.
And then you mentioned what it's going to cost the city to implement the program. Does the $577,000 also include upgrades to any technology that you're going to need?
It does include any kind of tech upgrades. We've been in conversation with ITA, and fortunately, in working with a vendor, the technology upgrades are very limited for the city. If we were to actually implement the program in-house, the cost of the IT upgrades would be very dramatic.
So you have a vendor in mind, or you're going to have an RFP?
We've met with several vendors who conduct these type of support for other municipalities, both cities and counties. We've just been, fact-finding to see what they're able to provide that would suit the needs for the city. And at this point, I believe we were hoping, if we did identify a vendor with an existing contract, to be able to, jump on and use that contract as well for the pilot and then go through the RFP process. If we would have to go through the entire RFP process, it could delay us another, 18 to 24 months.
That's it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much.
Mr. Fuentes?
How long is the pilot program for?
12 to 18 months.
And at what point do you all sort of come back to the council to see the efficacy of the program if it's completed to the objectives set forth?
I think we're happy to report back as often as you'd like. One of the measures, of course, will be hitting our targets in terms of the various numbers and revenues that we're anticipating in the first year. Presumably during the next budget process, we come back to you with renewed projections on the revenue side and also a reassessment of any staffing changes and potential for adding other departments to the program.
Great. Well, I would suggest to the chairs that we figure out sort of a time frame because your sort of estimate of, obviously it's going to take some time to ramp the program up, so the first year, the 40% sort of thinking as to what the revenues are going to be, I think we'd be okay if we sort of slid on that a little bit, but sort of the full year, I think is going to be really important for us to understand if this contracting out approach really is going to net the savings that we're looking for. So I'd request that we'd have this come back at some point, maybe at the conclusion of the incomplete first year, and then maybe at the halfway point of the first full year to understand if we're actually catching what we're trying to do here.
Councilman, the ordinance does include a requirement that the city attorney report quarterly.
Okay, great. Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Bonin.
Thank you. And I want to thank Mr. Koretz in particular for his work on this. I think one of my pet peeves in the city is we have a lot of stuff that we've made rules about that we don't spend a lot of time or effort enforcing, and I think that really infuriates our constituents because they want us to do what we say we're going to do. So I'm glad to see this program. I'm less interested in the revenue we get from it, frankly, than I am in giving the various agencies more enforcement tools. And I actually like that this gives us an opportunity to enforce without going directly to criminalizing something. I think it's a more reasonable and responsible and humane way to go on a lot of stuff, so I'm glad to see this. I noticed that there's 10 different noise things on here, and there's one that was missing that Mr. Wolfberg referred to. It's the one I hear about a lot in my district. Pacific Palisades Community Council has submitted a letter asking that we just include in this program section 112.04C, which is the leaf blower ordinance. So I'd like to ask that we add that, but I'd like to add that with a reminder or a direction to LAPD that they have the discretion under that ordinance to issue the citation to the person who hires the operator of the leaf blower as opposed to the actual operator, and I think that's the way we should do it.
Yes, sir, we'll take care of that.
Okay.
Second, Mr. Bonner?
Or, I'm sorry.
I'll be Bonin today.
You can be Bonin.
Let me take off my tie.
I did, so we're all fine.
You know, colleagues, and I get the program, and I see the majority of these violations deal with animals, and I can see the necessity for an ACE program when dealing with these citations, again, that are dealing with animals. I still struggle, in my days working as a senior lead officer, I still struggle with the fact that if somebody is urinating or taking a dump in public, and we're just going to give them here you go, here's a ticket, I struggle with that because I've seen it done and I've dealt with it. I struggle with the fact that if you have an open container, you're drinking in public, here's a ticket, pay the fine, and I struggle with it. I'd like to pull some of these citations out and like to make a motion to pull the violations that I have dealt with, and I know my brothers and sister police officers are struggling with this program as well. I'd like to pull drinking in public, 41.27C. I want to pull 41.47.2, urinating and defecating in public. I'd like to pull from the program 42.00, illegal vending. And lastly, I want to pull 66.28, tampering with trash from the program. That'll be my...
If you could just give me those back again. So it was the first one, 41.27. Are you
C, drinking in public.
And not D?
And D, sorry about that,
Okay,
yes.
C and D.
41.47.2, urinating, defecating in public. 42.00, illegal vending, which I know we're dealing with as a council on problem solving on that issue. And lastly, 66.28, tampering with trash.
Councilmember Buscaino, with all due respect, officers still have the ability to cite for a misdemeanor.
And frick them?
Yes,
Yes.
Yes,
and every one of these.
yes.
And
They still have that.
they still have the authority to do that at any time, and the fine structure is $250 for the first violation, then it's $500, then it's $1,000. At any given time, the officers retain discretion to, file a misdemeanor case and present it to our office for filing.
It's their discretion.
It's up to the police officer discretion,
Yes.
up to the...
And depending on the situation of the violation, and as you know, sir, many of the people that will be writing these citations will be your fellow senior lead officers. They have an understanding of the frequency at which these things are occurring. So they, in consultation with their city attorney partners, can take...
Through the neighborhood prosecutors,
Yes,
rather.
take those citations and move them along through criminal proceeding. But when it's expedient, this removes the need to go through the criminal justice system and arrives at a problem-solving fix much more quickly, because it takes the burden off the court system to have to deal with the matriculation of these particular citations.
We'll also make it very clear in the training that they have both options.
Let me weigh in on that as well. And I want to second Mr. Buscaino's motion and probably add a couple others. But before I do that, first of all, I think this is a great program, and it's going to give us a lot more tools and opportunities that we absolutely need. And it will, and I hesitate to use the word decriminalization because that's not totally accurate. It simply creates a wobbler and an opportunity for spirit under the law rather than letter under the law to allow our officers as well as others, animal control and various departments, to go after things that either A, have never been enforced, or if you don't have the other option as an officer in the field, many times it's just a warning. And so we're not capturing that. And that's another issue. And so, because they don't want to take it to that infraction level. They don't want to have that, that innocent person who perhaps just didn't really know the rule, and it's an isolated issue and an incident where it's not a chronic location or individual that gives them that other opportunity. So for that reason, I'm all for it. And also as an officer going out there and working and seeing this firsthand, it's always nice to have those options. The parts in terms of what Mr. Buscaino brought up, my concern is moving forward, looking down the road. Oftentimes what happens, and we've just gone through this last year, is called reclassification. And we had a number of crimes that were reclassified, and we do that often because things change. And I say often, I mean throughout the course of history. There's been numerous articles lately about looking at how our definitions of crime vary with FBI in terms of ag assault and all of those various other issues. Where this plays into this, and that's where it's related, is a reclassification. So going down the road, it's not up to us for reclassification. So suddenly if we're trying to drive crime numbers down, which is always the mandate to every division, no matter where they're at, there's always a mandate to hit a certain percentage and a pressure to do so. And rightfully so perhaps, but my concern is that 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road, the department who has the discretion for reclassification, suddenly these aren't wobblers anymore. Suddenly the discretion is taken away from, because we have this yet another opportunity for officers who are dealing with this in chronic places and issues of concern. We have a few of these, and I think the ones that Joe went through, and there's a couple others that I'd like to mention, suddenly it's up to the discretion of the department, and with no input from the policymakers, to say, okay, you know what, they're no longer wobblers, and or we'll keep it that way, except we would rather see the municipal citation process. And if you want to go up to an infraction, you're going to have to file out 15 more reports and classifications and justifications and documentation and photos and everything else to go along with it, and make it much more difficult for the officers to have that sort of spirit of the law, which is well documented. It has happened in the history of LAPD, and mostly for good reason, where it makes sense. So I'm not critiquing that. I'm just sharing it as fact, as we all know. So for that reason, and because this is a pilot, I think it makes sense on those particular crimes. What I'd like to add to that, and only for that reason, and I think as we see how this unfolds, and I've got a number of other ideas, I'd like to see a reporting quarterly to both public safety, personnel and animal welfare, of the number of citations issued, the number of administrative reviews that have been requested, the number of days it took to make the determination of validity, so we can track that metrics and make sure people are getting responded to if we're starting a new program, the number of payments that were made on time and or late or are outstanding, including the number of delinquencies, so we know what we're never going to collect, and the number of administrative hearings requested. So I'd like to add those quarterly reports to both committees if we could, just because, again, it's a pilot. We should track it. We can amend these anytime. We can add, and the anticipation is that we would actually add things to this in other departments as this rolls out. So rather than make the pool and cast a wider net bigger, I think it makes sense to narrow in where this first started and then add to it. A couple of the other things I think we've got to look at, I'd like to add to this, is the noise issue, 41.57. The vending and excessive noise on beaches, although I'm open to that one since I don't have any beaches in my district. The tobacco retail permit required, I think, is important, as this city has really set forth a path to crack down on those. And if people are going to just sell tobacco illegally, we don't want to make it a cost of doing business just be that they are issued a citation, they pay it, and it becomes a regular pattern. The deposit of garbage on a street, dumping issues are really a big issue that we're spending a lot more money on. In fact, this year's budget, we added $5 million for bulky item pickup. It's becoming a much more of a chronic issue in a lot of communities, and so I think that's one that I wouldn't want to do yet, and we'll see how this pilot rolls out. The other one is operating a parking lot without a permit is the last one I've got. And there's been a lot of issues with parking operators and not having permits and not paying the parking occupancy tax, the POT, to the city. In fact, it's been in the tens of millions of dollars where we have spent years in budget and finance going through and trying to go after, trying to get regulations to get everybody permitted, trying to stick with, rather than the operator, the property owner. There's still some issues we're working on there. I'd hate to add, at this point, particularly to this, what I will call I would want to take that one out for that reason. Those would be my suggestions.
Mr. Chair, I have got a question, or chairs. I'd like to, is that all part of one motion?
Two, one for the reporting, and then the second one to move forward on the pilot program as suggested with the recommendations added to Joe's.
Yeah, so just if I could sort of try to wrap my head around this. So there's three amendments, it sounds like, or potentially three. There's the first one that Mr. Bonin has suggested to adding the gas-powered leaf blower or whatever the municipal code associated with that is. There's Mr. Buscaino's motion to pull some of those sort of categories in the municipal code. And then I think, Mr. Englander, you added some to that. And then there's a third sort of amendment to increase the reporting, the list that you read off.
Not to increase, just to have a reporting.
Sure, and I think it's already, well, I'd like to have three separate votes then on those sort of amendments, because I think I can't support a majority of those, largely because I think it undermines the viability of the pilot program. I have to imagine that a certain amount of math is associated with making sure that this actually stands on its own, not to mention the ability to give more enforcement tools in the form of flexibility to you all, I think, is something that's not undermined. And certainly, if the concern is about classifications or reclassifying, I think that either can come from your committee, Mr. Englander, or the Police Commission to make certain that we don't give the departments the flexibility to skew the numbers when it comes time to reporting. So I think that the integrity of the program is potentially undermined, the pilot program, but certainly the flexibility is compromised if we sort of begin to pick and choose. So I would strongly urge that we not support the amendments to the list of the municipal codes that would be removed from the program and vote individually on the three different amendments.
Mr. Chair?
I have a comment.
Yes.
I couldn't have said that more perfectly, and I have to point out that these are tools. These are not anything that make it more difficult to prosecute these items aggressively if it's so chosen. If the department finds it a tool to cite rather than throw the book at them, that's the opportunity. I agree that this would largely gut the program. It would make it difficult revenue-wise for it to stand on its own, and it's really not necessary. I would consider taking out the tobacco piece, because I think that probably should always be a criminal prosecution. So that one would make sense to me. And I would also agree with taking out the parking lot piece. I think both of those should be prosecuted. Both of those, I think, are knowing violations. The rest of them, it's a tool. You had one, I forgot which one, that was a perfect example of what we're actually looking to do. Noise violations, for instance. I mean, if you don't have this, people are just going to go out and say, I'm giving you a warning. That's what's been done. If you take it out, you maintain that situation where police are just going to give a warning or not going to prosecute anybody. I think that's often true with public drunkenness. People just give a warning. They don't want to haul somebody in for it. This gives you an in-between tool. So I would recommend taking a piece of it as a friendly amendment, that we just take out the operating a parking lot without a permit and the tobacco, which are items where I don't really think we want to give people a bunch of chances. They know what they're doing. They're in violation. We just want to prosecute them. The rest of these, I think if we take them out, we really lose the tool that we're trying to provide. If it's not appropriate to go the more modest route, then they'll just go right to prosecution. But I think on a case-by-case basis, that's a decision that should be made by the people that are actually dealing with it. So I would take those two pieces as a friendly amendment. I would take Mr. Bonin's suggestion as a friendly amendment. I would take the suggestion of the reporting schedule as a friendly amendment, and I actually have to read into the record some pieces of the formal motion that I think were left out, that we approve the new position authorities for 9 months, that we approve appropriation of funds needed for new positions for 9 months, that we approve executing a contract with the selected vendor, and that we approve a number of sort of cleanup amendments that were provided to us, such as changing the mailing notice from 15 to 20 days. And if we want to still vote on the other recommended pieces to pull out, I would ask that be a separate motion that I would oppose.
Okay.
May I address one of the concerns?
Please.
Because I'm with the city attorney's office. I'm the chief of the criminal branch, the original supervisor of the neighborhood prosecutors. We are very sensitive to the concern that it would be an automatic default to a ticket on these offenses, which is why the ordinance was written, to give the discretion to the officers, who, of course, particularly our senior leads, work with our neighborhood prosecutors, because we all know that there are chronic offenders in every neighborhood. Those individuals would be presented for filing review for misdemeanors. So I think that's the overriding concern, and it's shared by both LAPD and our office, that is an automatic default, that the only thing you can do is issue a ticket, and that is not the case.
Please. Ms. Martinez, did you?
Mr. Koretz, are you done?
Yes.
I also don't agree in pulling some of these out from the pilot program. But to me, I think most of the frustrating part about all this is that I think it's more of an enforcement issue, that we just don't have the manpower to really do a lot of what's on this list. And so I live with folks who urinate at the park across the street from my house. I live with the illegal dumping at a park that's owned by the city that we don't necessarily keep up or necessarily pick up the bulky items every time we drive by there. Illegal vending's another one. Tampering with, some of our recyclable bins. When I see moms with their children and shopping carts digging through that plastic bin, I don't think they want to do that because it's luxurious. It's because it's out of necessity. So I find it very difficult. And if we want to appear to seem tough on crime, what we need to really do is figure out how we're going to enforce our own codes and make sure that we have the manpower to enforce them and do what we need to do to clean up our neighborhoods. But taking a look at this, to be honest with you, unless we have the manpower to really go after some of these, chronic offenders, it's very difficult. And some of our neighborhoods have been dealing with this for over 30 years.
Right. But I think the issue is LAPD has, approximately 5,000 patrol officers. And if you said, well, let's go after these quality of life issues,
right,
but do it in the context of only a misdemeanor review, that's where it gets very laborious, both for LAPD.
Well, we all call our senior lead officer every time we see,
exactly,
the homeless man that lives at the park and urinates in front of our kids. I mean, yes, and we still don't have a place to hold him. We don't know where to send him to. So these things are things that we have to deal with every single day. I just don't think that removing them is necessarily going to solve the problem. To me, it's got to do with the fact that we just don't have enough manpower to either cite them or find them an adequate place to live.
Absolutely. And plus, I think we all acknowledge that this is not a standalone program. We deal with the homeless, the chronically homeless, the seriously mentally ill, day in and day out in the city. Is it appropriate to give them tickets? No, they don't have the money to pay for this. But I think the city has made great efforts in conjunction with the county to address that. I know in the Valley we're looking at a mental health diversion program. So I agree. But I don't think just by taking them off it helps the situation. I agree.
Mr. Chair, if I may, it's obviously that I'm not getting support of the amendment, which I respect, and this is healthy dialogue. And if that's the case, I'll pull my amendments, and I still struggle with it, and I just can't support this pilot program as it is, and I'll show a no vote on it.
Okay.
Excuse me, I know the staff doesn't want us to gut this thing. I know you've worked so hard on this collectively with all parties involved, and it's not fair I struggle with it, so.
Thank you, chairs. I apologize for being late. I had a couple of prior commitments, so I think any tool that can enhance the quality of life in our neighborhoods with chronic offenses that are outlined and have been discussed is a good thing, and I'm all for getting this right. My question is one of clarification in relation to the mode of the way the citations are issued. Is it electronic? And is it printed? It's not. It's handwritten the old-fashioned way?
Yes.
Yes.
Can that be looked at? That seems inefficient. It would electronic. Right. Similar to issuing a traffic ticket, it's much more efficient.
We've actually, a couple of the vendors that we spoke to, one in fact that does the processing of the citations for the Metro, the fare evasion citations, those sheriffs and or non-sworn personnel have, it's a larger size, it's kind of like a Samsung type phone. They have portable printers. They're not very cost effective. They were about $2,500 each. So at this point, in it being a pilot, I don't believe that there would be any way to support that. They're out there, but we're looking at it, and we would love to be there someday, but at this point, it's just not cost effective.
And furthermore, so, for example, animal services, when they issue a citation, is that also handwritten?
Yes.
In, triplicate and all that stuff? The old school way?
Yes.
All right, so the technology just doesn't exist as it is.
Credit card on. Yeah. Technology exists.
But I mean,
we just don't have it.
I know it exists, but I mean, it's not being utilized. And I'm sure it's a funding issue as well.
It is.
Okay.
It's also an infrastructure issue that we have with our old CAD system, so
Right.
it's something that they're working on.
And so we can take a look forward to, think ahead for full integration of all systems with this in mind.
Yes, sir.
So that we're not duplicating costs here and there.
Absolutely.
We would love that.
Yeah.
So the pilot program will bear out numbers of the sort of scale we're dealing with, which will further inform next steps, I think. Thank you.
I'd like to move Mr. Koretz's verbal motion to amend the file as he previously described it with the omissions and admissions of new sort of things.
I'll second that. I'm sorry, what was the?
We're moving Mr. Koretz's verbal amendment to the file to make the omissions and new admittances to the thing as he previously enumerated, and I heard Mr. Bonin second my motion.
Okay.
Call for the question.
Since you already spoke, we can't call for the questions yet. That would be according to the rules if somebody didn't speak yet. But we'll continue the dialogue. I want to make sure, and I've got everything down in terms of the questions. I also think what we'll do is we'll bifurcate the votes, or trifurcate the votes, if you will, and we'll take a vote of each committee instead of a joint.
I heard Mr. Bruscainer withdraw his motion.
But there are still others on the table. Parking lots, tobacco, gas, power leafs, the reporting periods. Mr. Koretz's last motion, if you can articulate that. You did. Would you got a second again? That was
I
the
did.
one that you just read into the record,
Yeah.
so you have that in writing. Okay.
Yes. And all of those that you've mentioned so far would be friendly amendments. I'd be happy to include them all unless someone wants the tobacco and operating a parking lot to be voted on separately.
Is there anybody that would like that separated?
No, I think what Mr. Koretz read included what you are considering a second motion. So maybe for clarity, we could just sort of restate Mr. Koretz's motion again, because I think it's encapsulated in what you're asking for, Mr. Englander.
Yeah, go ahead and do that.
My motion added the suggestion that we add leaf blowers to the list of citable offenses, that we add the reporting suggestions made by Mr. Englander, that we remove the violations of selling tobacco without a license and operating a parking lot without a permit, as those should be prosecutable offenses, and that we add the language, which I'll read in again, that we approve new position authorities for 9 months, that we approve appropriation of funds needed for the new positions for 9 months, that we approve executing a contract with a selected vendor, and that we approve the technical minor amendments that were provided to us as well.
Okay. And with all of that, then it could be wrapped up into one. Let me ask a question before we take another vote or add anything to it. Are the funds to set this up already approved in this year's budget?
The funds are not approved. However, the revenue that's anticipated from the first year of the program would cover the cost of the program plus net some revenue for the city.
Yeah, but there's startup costs as well. And
The startup costs, again, the revenue would cover the startup costs in the first year.
Startup costs would come first.
Yes,
okay,
that's right.
So,
That's the requirement for the...
So this has to go to budget and finance no matter what. There's no funds to do it. The other question, it hasn't been identified, so we have to send it to budget and finance for that purpose. The positions that are outlined, are those already identified, or would those go through managed hiring?
Those are new positions, so unless your council took action to, free them for hiring, they
Okay,
might...
so this has to go through budget and finance no matter what for the positions and the funding. Okay. Okay. So with that, are there any other further amendments? And is there still a motion to bifurcate the votes?
John White, City Clerk, you're required to take a separate vote of each committee.
Yeah, before we even get into that, I wanted to make sure the separate votes could be one separate vote on each committee, or...
It sounds like there's only one motion on the table. Mr. Bruscaino withdrew his motion.
Regardless, even if it's a joint committee, each committee is required to vote separately.
Right. But I think he means when it bifurcate in terms of there being two motions, not...
Or two reports.
Exactly, right.
That's up for you to decide.
Right.
I think right now I haven't heard of any additional motions.
So we've got the reporting. We have, it will go to budget and finance as well for the financing part of this. The removal of the parking lot and tobacco, the addition of the leaf blower motion, the written recommendation from Mr. Koretz. Is there anything else? Did I miss anything else?
I think that's it.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and let's take a vote first of the PAW committee.
Koretz?
Aye.
O'Farrell?
Aye.
Fuentes?
Aye.
Okay, and then a vote of the public safety committee.
Englander?
Aye.
Bruscaino?
No.
Bonin?
Aye.
O'Farrell?
Aye.
Martinez? Thank you.
Two votes.
Okay, then it carries. It'll all move, both joint reports will next go to the Budget and Finance Committee for consideration. That concludes the meeting. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.